Thank you ever so much for joining us today. This has been a really popular webinar, actually our most popular webinar that we've ever had, which I think shows the demand for this level of for this information, and that a lot of people out there are struggling. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming along and giving up your time this afternoon, and particularly thank you to Lisa, Jackie and Andy, who are going to be taking the session today. If you could keep yourself muted whilst the presentations are going on. Later there'll be time to ask lots of questions in the chat about your understanding of what the presentations and that kind of thing. If you could try and keep the questions in the chat, unless you physically can't use the chat, then you're welcome to raise your hand, but generally we found it goes easier if all the questions are in the chat. So yeah, I'm going to pass across to Lisa now, and so thank you very much.
Hi everyone, and like Jade said, thank you so much for joining us, especially on a lovely sunny day, or at least it is here on the south coast. So I hope the sun's shining wherever you all are from. And yeah, what a popular webinar. And just to reinforce what Jade said, it clearly tells us how important this issue is, social care charges, and how much people struggle with it financially, but also just to understand it in the first place. So my name is Lisa, and I'm a caseworker at Access Social Care. And here with me today is Jackie, who's our community-led manager, and Andy, who's from Social Care Futures. We partner with them. So we are a charity who provides free legal advice to people with social care needs. And welcome to our webinar on understanding adult social care charges. So I know Jade briefly ran through it, but just very quickly run through it again. I hope everyone can hear me. I can't actually see anyone, so it's a bit pointless me asking that question. But I hope you can all hear me. If you have any issues whatsoever, just put something in the chat, and Jade or Jackie or Andy will get to you and try and help you. As Jade said, we're going to try and collate questions in the chat, and if we don't get round to answering all the questions at the end, we will do our best. Then Jackie and I will create a kind of FAQ document after the event and circulate it with any unanswered questions in there. So let's kick off. So as I said, I'm a caseworker, Jackie is the community-led support manager, and Andy is Social Care Futures. And Jackie and Andy are the A team, in that they are here to give their lived experience of how they got through the maze that is adult social care charges, and they're here to give you their top tips. What do we hope for you to get out of this session? So we want to provide an overview of social care charges, and we'll cover how financial assessments work, what adult social care charges are, and we're also going to look at disability related expenditure and minimum income guarantee. These are two crucial things to understand, particularly DRE. And then we're going to move on and look at trying to help you understand ways that you can potentially challenge charging decisions to make you a little bit more confident about doing that, and also what to do in the face of local authority common tactics. And finally, we'll end with top tips and recommendations. So in terms of the charging framework, just to highlight that there are two different frameworks, and this one is going to be focused on non-residential care. So that's where someone receives care in their own home, or supported living, or shared lives, or something like that. So basically support and care provided anywhere outside of a residential care home. So to start with, as well, just to demystify something. So a lot of people think that social care provision is free. Unfortunately, as it stands, it's not free, and the Care Act does allow local authorities to charge for their care and support. And this includes people on benefits, so means tested such as universal credit and ESA, and also disability benefits like PIP and DLA. And we found, obviously, in this very challenging cost of living crisis, we found that due to government shortfalls in local authority funding, many more disabled people and older people have been really massively impacted by the increased social care charging, and it is a big problem. So the details of how authorities can implement charges is in it's called the Care and Support Charging and Assessment of Resources Regulations 2014. Now, just to let you know, at the end of this slide deck, we've got a page that lists all useful resources, and all the guidance and the regs and the legislation that I refer to here is on that list. And Jade will be sending out a copy of the slides afterwards. Local authorities must also charge in accordance with it's called the Care and Support Statutory Guidance. So this is very accessible. I really like it because it's easy to understand, and it's supplementary to the Care Act, but it actually has a similar kind of level in law in that local authorities have to take account of it unless there's extenuating circumstances. And the bits around charging are particularly in Chapter 8 and Annex B and C. But essentially, like I said before, Section 14 of the Care Act gives local authorities discretion to charge. And as I think we all know, like 99% of local authorities in the country have chosen to charge. There is just one local authority that I'm aware of that doesn't charge. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, I think it's Hammersmith and Fulham. And I do remember that last year, 2014, was actually their 10-year anniversary of not charging, I think. And if you're interested, and again, if I'm right in remembering this, Disability Law Service wrote a report that was focused on charging, and they used Hammersmith and Fulham as a case study if you want to read up about how it works there. Did you want to say something, Jackie?
No, I was going to say it was Hammersmith and Fulham, and that they've shown lots of unintended positive consequences from that as well. So it's a good thing to put in front of your local authority if you are talking to them.
Definitely. So each local authority can have their own charging policy. So we will talk about how there are differences and flexibility that's been built in, but the policy cannot leave people with less money, and it cannot, and it can't contravene the legislation, obviously. So how do financial assessments work? So local authorities have a duty to arrange care and support for those people with eligible needs. And like we said, they do have the discretion to charge for that provision of care and support. The amount that they could potentially charge a person is calculated through a financial assessment. And this basically assesses a person's financial resources and works out the amount, if any, that they will likely have to pay towards the cost of their care package. So key principles that local authorities have to follow, and the overarching one is that people should only be required to pay what they can afford. And councils must ensure that people are not charged more than it is reasonably practicable for them to pay. Financial assessment must be comprehensive and must make sure it's applied fairly and take account of people's individual and specific circumstances. And local authorities can't make arbitrary decisions. So for example, if you find a service that's like 30 quid and the local authority says that they know somewhere that costs less, they can't just force you to go to that cheaper place for that provision. And they have to take your specific circumstances into account because the cheaper one may not be suitable. So a quick example of that is I've been supporting a gentleman who's deaf and blind, and he does get gym provision within his DRE, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And the council were trying to force him to go to a cheaper gym, sort of more mainstream gym, and he couldn't because it didn't provide for his sensory needs. So we were able to challenge their decision and get him to fortunately keep the more expensive provision that he can attend because of his sensory needs. Financial assessment process must be clear and transparent and apply consistently. And overall, it must support social inclusion, independence, choice and control. So it must encourage people to stay or take up employment, education or training. And a really important thing to bear in mind, and we will go through this again and again, is that there is a process that the local authority has to go through. and the local authority cannot start charging a person for their care, a contribution for their care, without completing a financial assessment. And before that, obviously a needs assessment has to have been done and eligibility determined before a financial assessment can be done. So if any of that happens before, potentially could be argued to be unlawful. So there are four main steps to the financial assessment. The first step is looking at any capital a person has. Then it takes into account income, and that includes benefits, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Then we go to any deductions that could be made. So this is where we talk more about disability related expenditure or DIEs and the application of the person's minimum income guarantee. So in terms of the assessment of capital, it's not formally defined in the charging regulations, but it does generally include property, but not always the house you live in, land and savings. And there are two thresholds that's important to keep in mind here. So if a person has over £23,250, they have to fund their own care, so pay for it privately out of those savings until it drops below 23,250. However, local authorities do have the discretion to set higher capital limits. Then between these two thresholds, so 23,250 and 14,250, a person will be expected to pay what they can afford from their income plus an additional tariff to take account of those savings of £1 per week for every £250 above the 14,250. It is a little bit complicated, but that basically means that they're paying just a little bit more because of their savings. So this explains it here, and you will get a copy of the slides, as I said before. So in terms of assessing the income, when assessing a person's income, any earnings, either self-employed or employed, are fully disregarded. And this is because the Care Act wants to promote independence. Most benefits are taken into account, including obviously means tested benefits like universal credit and employment support allowance, and some of disability benefits. So bits of disability benefits like PIP or DLA are excluded from the calculation, and we'll come on to that in a minute. So in terms of the deductions that people make, or that are made, people receiving local authority arranged care and support in their own home or supported living, so outside of a residential setting, they need to retain a certain level of income to cover their living costs. And this is set by local government, and it's called the minimum income guarantee, and it's a weekly amount which is determined by a set of criteria. It's set out in a local authority circular. Again, this will be on the final slide. And it's based on people's circumstances and its criteria. So, for example, a person of a working age would get a different amount to a retired person. So it looks at how old they are, whether they're in a relationship, and what sort of disability benefits they get, as to whether or not that enables them to get slightly higher premiums. And it's looked at again by the government every year. And authorities do have the discretion to allow people to retain a higher amount than the minimum income guarantee. I think it's fair to say that a lot of them don't. And the purpose of the MIG is to promote independence and social inclusion, and above all, ensure that people have sufficient funds to meet basic needs such as purchasing food, utility costs, or insurance. And this must be after housing costs such as rent, council tax, and net of any benefits provided to support with like housing, and after any disability related expenditure. Local authorities also have the discretion to charge a percentage of the disposable income rather than take 100%. But again, most of them, I think it's fair to say in our experience, choose to take all of it. The MIG hadn't been increased for many years until 2022, when it was increased, but by, nowhere near enough. And like I said, every year it is looked at again, and it should go up a little bit each year. So and it still fails to take account the increased cost of living in recent years. I skipped over that, didn't I? So in terms of disability related expenditure, this is anything, any service or item provision that a person might need, which is directly linked to their disability and because of their disability. So every year Scope, I think, does a report on the cost of disability, and it's found that around about average, if there's one person in the household who has a disability, it costs, the last report that I read anyway, said that it costs an average of £975 extra per month because of that person's disability. So as we can see, and because we're all here today, being disabled has significant cost implications, and it's significantly more expensive. So where possible, if you can identify any service, item or provision that you need as someone with a disability, and that's linked directly to that disability, then the council should look into it and at least consider it for disability related expenditure. And that's really important because that can then reduce a person's care charges. Where a local authority takes into account disability benefits, then they are expected to consider and potentially reduce or disregard the cost of the person's disability related expenditure. So it's a really, really important tool to try and get contributions reduced. In the Care and Support Statutory Guidance, there is a non-exhaustive list which is intended to guide local authorities in their decision making. And that's in Annex C of the guidance. But essentially, the important thing to remember is that the Care Act and the guidance brings in a certain element of flexibility when it comes to charges, and particularly disability related expenditure. And that flexibility has positives, but it also has negatives. So it means that a person's individual circumstances obviously has to be taken into account, and has to be flexible enough to be able to do that, which is great. But it does also mean that there is flexibility around how local authorities interpret DRE and perhaps make decisions around DRE, which can mean that one local authority may accept an item as DRE and another local authority might not. So that flexibility does bring with it some pitfalls. The guidance cautions against using the care and support plan to determine DRE, and also it cautions against local authorities having blanket policies to DRE. We'll go into this in more detail in future slides, but what's really important when thinking about how to ask for DRE or challenge your charges is about the evidence that you provide to support your DRE. So this can be receipts or invoices, and it can also be supporting statements from people involved in your life or professionals where appropriate. And on the receipts and invoices, many local authorities actually have a requirement to provide a certain amount of receipts or invoices. And again, that can vary. So, for example, my local authority requires 3 months worth of receipts, but the local authority where my mum lives is 6 months, which is ridiculous. And then I have heard of some local authorities requiring a year's worth of receipts and invoices, which is just bonkers. So things that are included in Annex C of the guidance is things like community alarm systems, cost of privately arranged services required, specialist items needed to need above average gas and electricity, and special clothing or footwear. So I won't go through them all, but they are there for you to look at, and the link is on the last slide. So in terms of the minimum income guarantee, we're talking about it takes into account people's individual circumstances. So it has certain criteria. So as you can see, and it looks at people's living circumstances. So if you're aged 18 or older, but less than 25, 25 or older, but under pension age, in a couple, and if you have if you're in receipt of certain benefits, it enables you to have extra premiums. So it's quite rigid, and local authorities can't or shouldn't deviate from it. And as I explained, this amount is set by the government, and it's awarded after housing costs and net of council tax and after DRE has been taken into account. Household expenditure. So this can be a tricky one to navigate with local authorities. So allowances can be made for council tax and water rates in some circumstances. The difficult thing that we encounter time and time again is for adult disabled children who live at home, and the issue of rent or mortgage and that sort of thing. What we find is that the vast majority of local authorities seem to think that adult children who live at home, disabled adult children who live at home, can do so for free without paying anything towards household costs. And we find that local authorities tend not to take these costs into account when calculating financial assessment and contributions for those adult disabled children. Unfortunately, the Care Act is largely silent on this issue, but Jackie, do you know of any potential ways around it?
No, I mean, I think they assume that a contribution is made towards gas and electric and utilities from the sum that's disregarded as a minimum income guarantee, but specifically it's when they won't, many don't consider that you would be paying towards rent or a mortgage, because the parent would have to pay that whether you're in the house or not. It ignores the fact that many parents, once their adult children leave, downsize or get a lodger, or if an adult child stays living at home and working, they would pay towards the mortgage if that's necessary, sort of things. I think Essex, for example, didn't we find out in there that they do, for an adult, obviously an adult child living in their own home would be entitled to housing benefit if they needed to. So Essex do allow, I can't remember what it was, £30 a week disregard, I think, for their contribution towards rent or mortgage. But I don't know many other local authorities that do.
No. So yeah, Essex, they allow a notional amount of, I think it's 20 per week, which as Jackie said, is basically nothing compared to what actual rent costs or mortgage costs are.
So if you're a joint tenant, they have to take it into account. So it's one way to potentially get around it if you've got an adult child living with you that's going to be long term, to try and get them on the tenancy agreement. That's how I got around my issue.
Okay, thanks, Ted. So it's really important to try and make sure that you are getting everything you're entitled to. So this includes council tax reduction and or, I hate this term, but severely mentally impaired exemption for council tax, if eligible. And information about that will be on your local authority website. So I hope this works, but this is an example of an actual financial assessment, and here's a recording that I recorded about how it's worked out.
It's muted, I think, at the moment, whoever's talking.
Sorry? Is it not working?
We don't have any sound.
No sound.
Oh, okay, right, okay. That's fine. I thought it wouldn't work, which is annoying. Okay, so right, so basically, so this person has 2 sessions of day service every week. Try and get my pointer up. And for that they pay 19 pounds 39p. And this is worked out by looking at the gross income to begin with. And it's really important that you understand it's gross. So they take everything into account here. So this person is on ESA, they're over 25, and this is their disability benefits here. So enhanced personal independence payment for both components. This leads to a gross amount of £343.35p per week. Then what happens is we look at the disregards or the deductions. So this is where we talk about the mobility component being disregarded. So the £75.75p comes off. And then for this particular local authority, they have a standard DRE allowance, which is 40% of the disability benefit. But rather cheekily, it's 40% of the disability benefit as at April 2019. So not current levels. And then disregarded income, which isn't clear what it is. So you'd need to ask for a breakdown of what that includes. And this comes to an amount, a very healthy amount for their DRE of £64.96. We generally find that councils don't give that much, so this is healthy. And the total amount to be disregarded is £140.71. And now we're going to have a bit of a problem because I can't move it up. So what I will do is I will use this one on the left hand side instead. So we'll jump down to here. So this one is Essex and it has a notional rent of £19.30. Essex breaks it down, so it's useful to see how different authorities present their financial assessments. There's costs awarded for laundry and medical, and also clothing and bedding. So this could be where a person has a condition that makes them more likely to wear through their clothes. Perhaps they have continence issues. They need extra laundry to be done because of incontinence or something like that. So this person has a total disregard DRE of £34.58. And then we turn to the minimum income guarantee, which Essex call protected income. And because this person is over 25 but under pension age, because they are single, obviously because they're not living in a care home, so they live at home, and they're on relevant disability benefits to enable them to get extra premiums, their MIG is £183.25. So what happens is the actual calculation is the amount that they have coming in, so the income, which is for this person is £267.60, minus the DRE and any additional deductions, so minus £34.58. Then taking account of the MIG, which they call allowances, so that's minus the MIG, the £183.25, which leaves them with a net assessable income of £49.77 per week, which the council have the right to take for their care contribution. And in this instance, they do. This person, if I remember correctly, has PAs, and I'm not sure how many hours support they get, but they have one-to-one PA support throughout the week. And it's worth just highlighting a few things, which we will reinforce later on. But in terms of charges, the amount the person pays for their charges isn't necessarily linked to the level of care and support that they receive. So, for example, if this person has, I don't know, say off the top of my head, 100 hours of PA support a week, And if they thought that they cut it down to 10 hours, they might reduce their charges. That's unlikely to happen because the amount is based purely on what the council considers them to be able to afford. And it uses this very, rigid calculation that's in the financial assessments. So that is where the DRE, which we'll come on to next, is really important, because the more a person can get deducted at this stage, the lower their overall weekly charge will be. Did you want to jump in and say anything, Jackie? Okay.
That's all good.
So, talking about DRE, so we've got some examples here which can be allowed as DRE depending on what local authority you live in. So again, every local authority will potentially differ in what they could allow for DRE and what they might not. So it's important when you're making your argument for DRE, like I said before, to really unpick the reason for needing that DRE, how it links to your disability, and also how it links to your eligible outcomes, and well-being as well. So if we unpick each one here, so incontinence pads. Now, some authorities will not happily, but will accept these, and others may try and push back. When it comes to DRE, local authorities do not have to take into account anything that's remotely, they would say, remotely connected to health needs. So a lot of DREs would say, a lot of authorities, would say that incontinence pads can be prescribed and are available via the incontinence team. Therefore, we're not going to provide you with additional or different types as DRE. And this is obviously very tricky to navigate because, for example, I'm supporting a young lady who requires incontinence pads, and whilst the argument can be made that they can get it via the incontinence team, the pads that are available via the incontinence team are very bulky and very visible. And obviously, as a young lady, that this lady doesn't want people to know that she's wearing pads necessarily. So she pays more to get more discreet pads, and she has requested that the more discreet pads are allowed as DRE. Cowpole. So cowpole is an interesting one, and we know that some authorities will allow for cowpole because obviously for some people swallowing tablets is too challenging, but they may have a condition that causes or leads to a lot of pain, so they need some kind of pain relief, and cowpole is the obvious answer. And again, it all depends on how the argument is presented to the council, to the local authority. And we do know of success in this area where people have had cowpole allowed as DRE. When we talk about heating and additional costs, on the next slide, I'll be able to give you more information. But if you can demonstrate that the above average heating and energy costs is directly linked to your disability. So, for example, if you have a powered wheelchair and you obviously need to keep it charged up, or if because of mobility issues you can't move around easily, so you feel the cold easier, then that's their examples where if you have the supporting evidence, you could potentially make a good argument for the extra costs. Oat milk. So again, because of a person's, if it's linked to their disability, then obviously there can be the argument to be made for certain food types to be included. So for example, I'm supporting a gentleman who has severe disabilities, and it's been found that gluten can really affect his behaviour, in that products with gluten in will cause him to find it more challenging to regulate his behaviour. Obviously, gluten-free products are like 3 times the cost of non-gluten-free products. So we're currently trying to challenge the local authority to allow for gluten-free products to be included as DRE. So talking about heating and energy, so to demonstrate above average heating costs, quite often a lot of local authorities are members of the National Association for Financial Assessment Officers, and they basically, what they are is basically is a membership subscription type thing, and they give guidance to local authorities about how they should implement guidance, their own guidance for DRE. So they've produced this table here, which gives a standard amount or sort of average amount to be expected of energy use for a single person flat terrace, a couple flat terrace, etc. If you can demonstrate that you have more than this by your bills, by sending in bills, obviously, and there's good reason which are linked to your disability, then you could potentially argue for the difference. So we use an example. There is a single person living in a flat or terrace. I'm going to say £2,000 because my maths is not that great. So if as someone who's single living in a flat or terrace with a disability spends £3,000 per year on their heating and energy, that £1,000 difference with the right and robust supporting evidence could be argued to be included as DRE, which they would then divide by the number of weeks to give them a weekly amount, and thereby help reduce their care charges. There's also things like specialist equipment. So there is a duty for local authorities to provide £1,000 worth of aids and adaptations for free, and then privately paid care. So the statutory guidance says that cost of any privately arranged care, including respite, should be considered by the local authority as DRE. And this National Association for the Financial Assessment Officers guide also provides guidance on to local authorities on how to charge for specialist equipment like stair lifts or lifts or powered wheelchairs, in terms of, you know, what's reasonable to allow for DRE and how it's worked out. So it's quite a useful guide. It's a little bit tricky to get hold of, but you can find it eventually by Googling it.
I was just going to jump in and say I'd also caution in that, actually there's some big flaws in the guidance. So, for example, my son has to have a bigger house than he would otherwise need. He's a single young man, but he needs a lot of space to run around due to his disability. So he's in a 3-bed house, not a 1-bed flat. So his bills shouldn't be compared to a 3-bed house. It should be compared to what he would be living in if it wasn't for his disabilities. And also I talk about this a bit later, but sleep disorder. So he's awake many nights, the heating's on all night for his 2 waking staff as well. So I would argue it's not about the average. It's about, it's a third more than it would have been because of those extra hours. Because many people this is an average for everybody in the country. It's like the average spend on clothing. I don't think I've ever spent the average spend on clothing that they come up with. And if you're on benefits, then obviously you're trying to buy things from charity shops or in sales or cheaper options anyway. So you'll never get to the average spend, but you're spending more than you would have in that situation. So yeah, just if they do just quote back averages at you, just say, well, that doesn't apply because, or whatever it is.
Thank you, Jackie. And Jackie, you can carry on.
Oh yes. Yeah. Thanks. If you want to go to the next slide. So my son Thomas is 26 now. Lisa, did you? Yeah, that's it. So we were halfway through negotiating about his disability-related expenditure when he got moved on to continuing healthcare fundings. And then under continuing healthcare, you don't pay a contribution, so it got suspended. But just some of our thinking about what we were applying for. housing, as we mentioned, is quite challenging sometimes when some young person lives at home and we weren't able to apply, ask for a contribution towards our mortgage, even though his DLA all through his life had been towards our mortgage because we bought a bigger house in order for him to have the space that he needed. But when he moved into his own home, he's got a specialist mortgage, and it's a house share with a housing association, and so he does have some additional costs above what the housing benefit pays. So if housing benefit doesn't cover the whole cost of somebody's rent or something like that, then that's additional housing costs, and they should be disregarded as well. Not even as a disability related expense, but just disregarded. He also pays towards an organisation called My Safe Future, who help maintain that mortgage and keep an eye on it. So again, that's because of his disability, he can't manage his own mortgage. The other things that I just mentioned about the energy costs, he does, he has a sleep disorder, so he might be awake for 73 hours, he might be awake all night and asleep all day, but he has staff in the house all the time. They can't be in a freezing cold house if they're supposed to be awake and moving around. So we do recognize that his heating bill is higher than it would be if he wasn't awake in the night and you turn the heating down. And that's one where I would say it's not about averages, it's about dividing it, saying a third of this cost is for nighttime cover, which other people wouldn't have to pay for. Thomas eats loads of his clothes, chews lots of holes in. So again, we're constantly replacing clothing, and it's trying to represent that as best you can without, as I say, the averages don't always work out for people. The extra laundry baskets, that isn't actually Thomas's house, but it could be. Because of his continence issues, there is a lot of extra laundry and drying in the winter. And again, our local authority tries to say it's a standard disregard that they'll give you if you have continence issues, but that, that might take you from 1 load a week to 3 loads a week, whereas Thomas might have 2 loads every day. So do again challenge, and that there are things online which can help you calculate an average load of washing and drying, because it's not always possible to dry clothes in the house because you end up with damp problems. So or you might be going to a laundrette to do that drying or something. Again, bits of equipment, some things Thomas has a sleep disorder, he falls asleep wherever sometimes, or he has a catatonic episode. So we get some of these specialist mats from the minor equipment store, but we still have to buy more because it might be in any of those rooms and it's not practical to keep him off the floor. He ends up with pressure sores and all sorts of things. So we've bought those. And they'll say, oh, the NHS should buy those, but actually the NHS have provided what they feel is sufficient, but they recognise that he probably does need more. So they have done us a note to say that it's reasonable for us to have bought more because of his disability. But often the local authority will say, oh, the NHS should provide that. But if they're not providing that, just get them to write a note. And that's what happened with the cowpole, in the NHS, he goes through bottles of it, 15p, 18p for a packet of paracetamol, isn't it, for all of us, but £5 for a bottle of cowpole, which he goes through in a couple of days if he's got a cold. And the NHS don't, on the whole, provide cowpole or paracetamol to people. So again, we got that included in principle. Extra costs of going on holiday. I think somebody asked a really good question about extra travel insurance. When Thomas comes on holiday with us, his PA or 2 of his staff come with us. This is Maisie and Thomas walking in the sea. But, we have to book a bigger holiday cottage so that there's rooms for the care staff to stay in as well. So that's an extra cost that's due to disability. So those sorts of expenses can be considered as DRE. And then the other one that I see quite a bit, which the dog isn't actually Thomas's dog. We've been considering getting him a dog because we think it really would help him regulate some of his emotional distress. And this is his brother's dog who comes to visit a lot, which is lovely. But I do see people where they want the cost of the dog to be counted as a disability because related expense, because it is largely around, that support for the person. And some local authorities insist, unless it's a registered support dog, i.e. come through a charity or a process. But again, if they a lot of those absolutes can be challenged. It's like if somebody like his learning disability nurse could write to say, yes, having a dog will have a really good beneficial effect for him, then they should be considering those extra costs of having a pet. So yeah, they'll often express things in absolutes. No, we don't cover that, or we don't include that. But doesn't have to be in the care plan. But some things might need, again, supporting somebody whose daughter needs to be kept really active, going out to activities a lot, and going to Legoland, going to zoos, going to all sorts of things costs a lot of money. And so yeah, the learning disability team has written to say that she finds it very challenging if she's not kept very stimulated. And so those activity costs, which I would like to argue should be in the care plan, but if they should at least be considered as a disability related expense. I think that was my quick run through of my thoughts.
Thanks, Jackie. That's all really helpful. And just on before we move to Andy, just on the point of DRE for pets, dogs in particular, in my previous role, I was successful in getting the cost of dog walker for a gentleman who had severe bipolar, and we successfully argued that his dog provided him support for his well-being. So that was another example of how dogs can, care costs for dogs. Some care costs can be included as DRE. And I think what we're trying to say here is the local authorities will quite often push back, and they will refer to absolutes or averages or thresholds or whatever. But there's, it's all about using your own experience and your own evidence and to put forward your argument, and just keep trying, keep persevering, keep pushing. And there's every chance. The law exists there to support you and give you rights, and it's about just doing everything you can to get them in for you. So have we got Andy, Jackie?
I am here, yes.
Good. I couldn't see
Yeah,
you.
if you can't see me, that's fine. I'm in the background here. Hi. I'm sure I'll pop up on the screen at some point. Once
I'll move the slide across then.
Right. Brilliant. Hi everyone. So I'm Andy McCabe. I got a brief intro at the beginning. So I'm part of Social Care Future, which is a movement really simply defined as trying to improve the social care system now and in the future in the United Kingdom. I've been a registered social worker for about 5 years now, and I became one to kind of try and understand the systems that I exist in due to drawing on social care support myself. So I draw on 24-hour social care support with PAs, and I've had to do different things with DREs, and I've had quite a few different experiences over the years. So what I'll do is I'll start by going through the approach I took and kind of tried to develop for myself to break down what might actually be a DRE. I'll follow it up with how I contacted my local authority, how I practically did that, and then I'll tell you a bit about what DREs were accepted. The first bit, though, is about identifying the DREs, because for me, I don't know about other people, but when you're living kind of, with a disability and kind of doing things differently, basically, as long as I can remember, all the additional different bits or more expensive or specialized items kind of just become everyday life. And because they're everyday life, I'm really, really rubbish at recognizing them. So one of the things about claiming DRE or getting DRE is to be kind of specific and highlight these things, which can be a bit of a challenge if you're kind of almost kind of oblivious to them from living with them so long. So I'll go through these 5 bits that I kind of put up, but the main thing really is to think about how the items or services affect you in like a holistic way in your life. So really it's about kind of thinking about everyday life, having a bit of a reflect about your disability and what it means and what it impacts in terms of your daily activities and routines. And then like what adjustments, services and other items have become necessary to kind of manage your day effectively, to do the things you want to do, and what you might struggle with that. And part of that is about comparing your expenses to other people who don't have a disability. A little bit about what we showed in that slide before in terms of heating and things like that. But the way I think it should be viewed is really that it's a really personal, discretionary thing, because my the things that I get or need will be different to someone even with very, very similar kind of attributes to myself. But it's also about documenting these items, no matter how small they are, because they do build up. And then thinking about things that you use more frequently. So the first bit I've got there is about reflecting on daily activities. So really that's about considering that everyday life part that I just mentioned, but think about specific equipment, the modifications in your home, or modifications you might need to make or would make life easier, and services that you use that other people might not. And having like a reflection on your daily routines can try and kind of pinpoint those areas, and thinking a bit about what would be, what is more difficult, what could be made easier. And then the second part there is about comparing your expenses. So it's about looking at the expenses you incur basically, and then comparing them to what a similar individual without a disability might spend. And that can be helpful sometimes, talking with family or friends and realizing, your heating is way more, or something else. It can be all sorts of things that kind of stand out a little bit, that actually you're paying a bit more than most people. And actually, as Jackie said, often if someone is, on benefits, actually the things that we choose to spend our money on are much more kind of pointed, because there's some limitation in funding there compared to someone who isn't. So it's about trying to have a little bit of a think about what feels expensive as well compared to other people. The third item there is about listing items and services. So I found it really a challenge to pinpoint my DREs or what's more expensive. So I tried to make a bit of a list, and I also think about the items and services, and then I try to break them down a little bit more. So this can be things like medical supplies, therapeutic services, the heating, transportation costs, particularly if you can't use public transport or for your PAs or something, and again documenting them. And then the number 4 there is about considering increased usage. So it's about kind of thinking about those everyday things that you use or services more frequently because of your disability. So again, that could be the higher utility usage, like electricity. It could be laundry. It could be things like gloves. It could be clothing. It's really trying to break down where things are happening, much more frequently, and then how that might link to your disability. And then the 5th option there is about acknowledging higher costs. So it isn't just about, if you use something a lot or you need something that someone else might not need. It's also, there should be scope that the items that or services that you require because of your disability might just be more expensive. So instead of replacing, trousers 4 times, a month or something like that, maybe it would just be more cost effective to buy much more expensive resilient trousers. And that additional cost should be seen, in my view, as a disability related expense. And it's about thinking about those more expensive alternatives that might make life, easier, and also be a pragmatic solution to offer, like frequent replacements. So it isn't just about things that you need to replace more often, or things that are completely, specialized, for instance. It's about how you might be able to meet those kind of requirements in like an efficient way as well. And so those 5 things that I put there, I know there's like overlaps and crossovers, but I think having some time to think about it, sitting down and reflecting, and then doing some comparison and listing, and then it does help, I think, to do it with people who are familiar with you as well, because often they'll be like, oh, I wouldn't use that, or that I think you use that more than someone else. Can be a bit of a helpful, sometimes reflecting on ourselves isn't the easiest things to do, especially like I say, when you're living with these things every day and things just become, the normal everyday thing. And that's kind of what we're trying to highlight. So in terms of how I actually filled out my DRE for my local authority, so the first thing I would say, and I think I might have seen it a couple of times in the chat about when you put the DRE form in or things like that, is I got given my financial assessment form for the local authority that I live in now. And I requested the DRE form 3 times. And on the 3rd time, they just sent me another financial assessment form. And I was like, no, this isn't what I want. I want the one with DRE. Now, on that financial assessment form, amongst, I don't know, however many pages of, thousands of words of text, there was one box with like 1 or 2 lines on it, and it just said other. And that's what they considered where I should put my DRE. It didn't say that on it. It just said other. So I would say make sure if you're getting paperwork that you can see that actually, where you're filling that in. And I mean, I would say that it's probably kind of in their interest to make that a little bit more obvious. So do try and search them out. And it's sometimes not as straightforward as it should be. One of the things I did do was I used the Access Social Care chatbots to put some things together for the DRE. And that was really helpful to word things. And even if you didn't use that, wording things can be quite important. So trying to be assertive and confident is definitely something that was helpful, I think, in my case. And I know from talking to other people who draw on support who have got successful DREs, is that they've worded sometimes things like, this obviously meets my well-being and outcomes and things like that, and it should fit within DRE, but given that it's clear that I would require this, would it be better for the local authority to fund this through the care plan or through a DRE? And sometimes that's just from other people's experiences, I've heard that sometimes that makes them happier to just give it as a DRE rather than write it into a care plan. So how I wrote it as well, trying to put in that confident, kind of assertive, friendly tone, was that I'd itemised what I thought was DRE, and I also put a clear explanation next to it as to how it met the kind of the reason why it's a disability related expenditure, how it links to my disability and how it links to outcomes and well-being and stuff. It wasn't too onerous, to be honest. It was just a few lines, and a couple of them I linked to ombudsman decisions that I'd found, which was quite helpful, and I'll say about that in a second. And then yes, I put kind of like as a note here just to write it out clearly, because I think that's very helpful. And then a couple of kind of examples of the things that I put through that were accepted, just to give. So for me personally, again, with that idea of finding it really hard to know where to start as to what might be an expense or what might not be, I find examples really helpful. So I've put a few here that I've put through that were successful. And one is fuel, and I didn't know this was accepted or would be accepted. So I've got a Motability vehicle, which means all the money that I get from PIP for mobility goes towards a Motability vehicle. So I'm left with no funding effectively in terms of benefits for travel. So fuel is an additional expense that obviously, if you actually want to use the Motability vehicle, you require to get from A to B. So I worked out over, it took me, I only did it for a few weeks really, to work out about an average spend on fuel. And mine's about £50 per week. I mean, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But I went for £50 per week, and they accepted that without really any question. The other bit, which I also saw in chat, was about private medication. So private medication is kind of interesting because it's very medical focused, which, like I think Jackie might have mentioned, that they sometimes aren't keen on funding things that are medical because they view that the NHS should be dealing with that. But so I found an ombudsman decision that backed up that it should be considered for DRE, but it came and comes with a caveat and requirement, which is that you need a letter from a specialist explaining why it's not available on the NHS, or why what is on the NHS isn't suitable for you specifically. So basically, you've got a professional saying, yes, there are NHS options, but actually it won't fulfil the requirements or meet the needs of this person. Therefore, the private medication is currently the option that would be most beneficial medically. So I get private medication funded through DRE, and also the quarterly appointments that I have to have with the consultants. And that itself reduced my DRE, massively, as you can imagine, I'm sure. One of the other things that I managed to kind of explain was that I've got like a Hoover robot, like a Roomba thing, and I put that down as DRE because I thought, well, it enables me to actually, do some kind of housework that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And they accepted that over a few years, basically. So they'll effectively reduce the DRE by a set amount and expect the Roomba to last for 5 years. And that also included warranty and insurance on top, which they pay. Previously, I've had the additional heating bills paid for, or not paid for, but reflected in DRE a little bit at least. Currently, as well, another few things that that were successful was protein shakes, because I find it hard to eat kind of enough to get sufficient protein. And also, due to my disability, protein is pretty important to keep muscles functioning. And again, they accepted that very, I think hopefully if you spell it out, it becomes kind of a sensible decision to just agree with. One of the others was a Ring doorbell, because I can't actually, get to the door and look out of it and see and decide whether or not to let someone in without opening it. And it also enables me to talk to people at the door to do deliveries and things. And that includes the monthly subscription. And they've put that down as a care alarm, I guess because their system probably accepts that, but they've accepted that. Gloves is another thing for PAs. Previously, I also had an element of rent reflected in the DRE, which was helpful. And on my list of requested DREs was some recognition of the cost of broadband, a mobile phone, and a mobile phone contract. Because for me, I need a mobile phone that's lightweight and voice activated. So my view is that the additional cost of that over and above, basically the cheapest phone available, should be reflected as a DRE. But what has actually happened prior to these three things kind of going through is that my weekly contribution, I think, was about £100 to £105, actually is now zero. So it actually doesn't really make much, like they've not really looked at it because it's now zero, so there's no real need. I think it was actually at the last webinar that me and Jackie and Lisa did, was literally I got an email through just accepting a lot of these DREs and like basically zero rating everything down, so my contribution is zero. So I think it's really valuable to kind of go through that and also recognise that whilst they might say no to some things, you can still put forward a solid kind of robust argument for requiring them. And then there are other avenues to explore, which I'm sure we'll go through in a bit, as to how to challenge decisions, because sometimes they do get it wrong. And, I know someone, particularly with the private medication, who had to go to Ombudsman first to get it actually recognised by their local authority that they should really be reflecting that in their DRE. But I think that's probably covered most of the bits there. I'm sure Jackie or Lisa will remind me if there's anything else to add. And also, I was looking through the chat as well. So.
Thanks, Andy. That's all really helpful, and thank you, Jackie, too. So, I mean, key things that really resonated with me there was what Andy said about, trying the problems, identifying DRE, and working out what actually you need because you're disabled and what isn't, because you use it so often, it kind of in essence becomes part of your normal, if you like. So yeah, it is difficult. And we will touch on Access Ava, which is our online support tool, which can provide generate template letters, which are really important to help make your arguments that little bit stronger, because they reference the law. We always find that a well-crafted letter which just reminds local authorities of their duties and law, can be really helpful. And we have lots of success through writing letters for people. And Access Over is a free tool there that's available for everyone to use. And it takes a while, but it's fairly simple to use. If I can use it, then I guess anyone can. So I think now is a good time to move on and have a quick break, if that's all right. So 10 minutes, is that too long? Jackie, what do you think?
No, it's probably good. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we'll come back at, I don't quite see what the time is. We'll come back at, God, my maths is terrible, 15:20, 3:20. See you in a bit.
Bye.
Jackie?
Yeah.
Yep, cool. If everyone's okay with that, we'll move on. So we're going to talk now about challenging a charging decision. So in terms of, we'll look at steps you need to take and what you need to do. So there are a number of steps that you can take when considering how to challenge a decision. So the first one is to really carefully interrogate and unpick the financial assessment, particularly in relation to the benefit amounts and the MIG amounts, and that the correct premiums are added. So obviously, local authorities do make mistakes, and sometimes these can have the wrong figures in or the wrong calculations. Check that the overall calculations have been carried out correctly, and importantly, look at the DRE and think about whether they've missed anything or haven't captured the right costs. Now that can be a little bit tricky because, as we saw on the actual examples of financial assessments, rather unhelpfully, local authorities tend not to break down what they're allowing for DRE, and that's where it can get very difficult. So sometimes you have to go back to the local authority and ask for a specific breakdown of what they have allowed for DRE. It's an extra hoop to go through, and it is annoying, but sometimes you have to do that. Once you've gone through the 3-point checklist, so checking, checking, and checking again, the main way to, as I said all along, the main way to reduce a person's charges is to get DRE secured. So top tips to requesting DRE, and this builds on what Andy said and his helpful guidance. The way in which you present your arguments is really important. And again, Access Ava has a really good letter there, a template letter on how to request DRE. And it's useful because it makes reference to law, like we said, and it can give you guidance. But as Andy said, it's really helpful if you can be clear in how you set out your letter, and be clear in the reasons for why you need why you think you need the DRE, and how it links to your disability. And supporting evidence is really, really important. So this can be, as we said, receipts or invoices, or it can be statements from people involved in your life. So professionals, obviously good, but it can also include family members or support workers, just to give extra weight and extra evidence to demonstrate why you need the item or the service that you're requesting as DRE. And as Andy said, try and link the expense to your disability, the well-being, and it's really your well-being, and it's really helpful if you can also just link it to what eligible outcome you think it will help you meet. So supporting statements can be things like assessments or reports from professionals. So one of our clients had a GP letter explaining why they needed an expensive diet and why they needed extra water. Other reports could come from autism specialists or mental health or physiotherapists. And then supporting statements are from people involved in your life. So it could be your family who explain what you use and why you use, and the impact of not having it and what that would be on your well-being. And then, as Andy said, try and link to your disability, well-being, and an eligible outcome. So in terms of an example, let's unpick how perhaps someone with autism who benefits or needs noise cancelling headphones would perhaps submit a request for DRE for the noise cancelling headphones. So first of all, let's think about why do they need them? So they need them to help block out the noise of the environment and minimise the impact of sensory overload so that their anxiety is reduced. And how does it help? What impact do they have on their well-being? So it helps keep them calm and reduces their sensory overload. How do they link to an eligible outcome? By reducing their sensory overload and anxiety, the headphones enable them to access their local community, which is one of the 10 eligible outcomes. So that's one way in which you can unpick each example. Jackie, did you want to add to that?
I was going to come on to receipts and invoices. There was a question in the chat about that, and a lot of local authorities actually say as soon as you put in for a disability related expense, you have to have 6 months worth of receipts or something. And there has been an ombudsman challenge about that, saying that unless you knew 6 months ago that you were going to be asked for those receipts, it's irrational to be expecting you to have them. And so it recommended to the particular authority that was being challenged that it was reasonable for them to say, we're going to allow this for now, and we want receipts in 3 months to show that that was a reasonable amount. And if it's not, then we will, obviously amend the amount. So, don't be put off that. Again, use words like reasonable. It's not reasonable or rational for you to expect me to have these because you haven't told me I would need them. Again, they do have to work rationally.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Jackie. And there's also it's from about 5 years ago now, another ombudsman case that that was about making sure that local authorities don't put too onerous requirements on requesting receipts. So that's from a while ago now, like I said. So how do you challenge a DRE related decision? Like I keep saying, successfully arguing for the inclusion of DRE is the main way in which we generally assist clients to get their charges reduced. So the way that we do it, as Andy said, is we generally tend to use the needs assessment and compare that to the care plan to make sure that eligible needs are being met and identify any potential unmet needs. And although the starting point for DRE can be the net care plan, local authorities are required to take a more flexible and holistic approach. And recent case law has demonstrated how important it is to consider all activities and expenses that fall outside the care package. So that was case law for Maidenhead and Windsor. And there was also, I think that was from 2023, and also case law was BG and his brother versus Suffolk, and that was 2022. That was about holidays, so slightly different, but also included activities. So to challenge a DRE related decision, make sure you understand the local charging or DRE policy, because as we were saying before, potentially every local authority policy can differ slightly. So as we saw in the example that I brought up a few slides ago, some authorities will use a standard allowance and others will actually look at each expenditure and give you a certain amount. So find out how it's worked out. Is it clear in the financial assessment, like I said, what has been allowed for DRE? And if it's not, you can request a more thorough breakdown. Gather supporting evidence that might be helpful, as we've discussed, medical reports, supporting statements, etc. And check the care plan. So make sure you understand how eligible needs are proposed to be met and look out for any unmet needs or additional activities or expenses which could potentially be claimed as DRE. And as Jackie and I were just mentioning, it can be helpful, and as Andy found, to be aware of relevant case law and or ombudsman cases. And that can sound scary and quite off-putting because, reading those kind of documents can be overwhelming, and they are obviously very weighty. The law is such a weighty thing. But there are lots of ways to break it down, and there's lots of useful websites that can help give you a summary of those kind of decisions, which you can then, brief points you can include in your letter, for example. So other things to be mindful of is, like I said before, the overall charge is not necessarily proportionate to the amount of care received. So the charge is calculated from income and expenditure, and reducing care hours is unlikely to reduce the charge. A person cannot be charged more than the package costs the local authority. Charges have to be reasonable and affordable. And to challenge on these grounds, you would need to demonstrate unaffordability and obtain actual expenditure to show how it's not reasonable and it's not affordable. So community equipment is free, as we've already established. Be mindful of blanket policies. These could potentially be unlawful. So, for example, if the local authority has a standard DRE allowance, but they refuse to depart from this and consider other expenditure, and that's how a lot of authorities arguably get away with it, is they have a little line, very small, that says something like, "We will consider other reasonable requests." And as Andy said, many local authorities don't actually, bring up the subject of DRE, and it can be very difficult on their website to find any information about DRE. People charged from a mental health hospital under a specific section can have free social care under mental health provisions. And as Jackie said, continuing healthcare means that social care can be provided at nil costs.
The one really confusing area around CHC is that many areas, there's the term, it's half local authority, half CHC, and that's not actually a real thing. If somebody is assessed to be eligible for continuing healthcare, then it is entirely continuing healthcare funded, and therefore you don't pay any contribution. But often someone doesn't meet the eligibility criteria for CHC, but health agree to pay a contribution towards the care package. And so that's a joint funded package, but it's not CHC. So you're still actually under the responsibility of the local authority, and they will still apply the charges as normal.
Yeah, CHC is a minefield. So let's quickly look at some things that you might find can happen. So theory versus reality. So like Andy mentioned with his private prescription, many local authorities would potentially try and push back against that, because if they categorise a need as being health related, then they're not under any duty to fund that. So again, reinforcing what Andy said, linked to wellbeing and your eligible needs and obviously your disability. So some people, for example, have been refused personal training as it was deemed to be a health need, whereas a recent ombudsman case found that actually, in this one example, that was the wrong decision. Andy, did you have anything additional? You come back.
Sorry, I didn't realise my camera was off. But I suppose on that note, it probably does resonate with the idea that what I was kind of saying about DREs really should be kind of personal, because it isn't about kind of blanketly applying, what works for some people and, others. It's that idea that, for this individual, this is what they require due to their disability, and then linking it to their well-being. And that's why it's such a personal thing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So again, it's about what Andy just said. So making it personal and going to the right people to get the right evidence to show that actually it's not a health need and it is a social care need. So it could be for, if you have a condition that means you have to go to the gym, or you need specialist personal training, is about going to the doctor, maybe getting a letter to say why that's necessary, how it impacts on your condition, and maybe even going to the specialist personal trainer for them to write a statement as well.
It's also to say that it's a disability related expense, not a social care related expense. Gloucestershire actually tried to change the title of it for a while. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's not related to social care, it's due to your disability that you've got this extra expense.
That's true. Thanks, Jackie. So a common problem that we encounter, or barrier, I shouldn't say problem really, common barrier is that local authorities fails to give documents to clients, and these are basic things that the law says a person should have. So things like needs assessment, care plan, and financial assessment. So again, the solution would be to use Access Ava to generate a letter which would reference the relevant sections of the Care Act. So under section 12, you have a right, to have a copy of the needs assessment. Under section 25, you have a right to have a copy of your care plan. And for section 17, it's the financial assessment. And they're really important for you to be appropriately and adequately involved in the care planning process and be able to make informed decisions. And it's all about person-centred planning, which is central to the Care Act. So we're coming to the end now, so we might have some time to go through some questions. So in terms of what's next and what you can do, follow our tips to check your financial assessment. Look at the relevant local authority policy on DRE and non-residential charging. If you can't find it on the website, and I will be honest, I spend most of my life searching on local authorities' websites to look for these, and some of them, my local authority in particular, deliberately makes it really, really difficult. So it is difficult. But you can if you can't find it, you can just ring them up and ask for it, or you could use our online tool Access Ava to write a letter to ask for it. Keep receipts for your expenses that relate to your disability or condition. And again, once you've got everything and get that important evidence that we've spoken about, like statements, assessments, reports, letters, etc., and receipts, use Access Ava to write a letter requesting for DRE, and as Andy went through, include as much detail as possible. So here are all the links and resources that I spoke about. So Jackie, Andy, shall we turn to some of the questions? We've got a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all good.
There's a couple that have been about receipts, and whether, if they haven't been asked for any disability related expenditure within a financial assessment. And I was just saying that actually, you can just email the finance team and say, I'd like these expenses to be considered as disability related expenditures within any financial assessment. You don't have to fit into their form if they're not asking for it in that way, and tell them the story about why they know nothing. The finance team know nothing about your life or your child's life or family member's life. So like my son's mats, camping mats around his bedroom and living room, it's like, that makes no sense to anybody. Why would that be a disability related expense unless you tell them the story that he will sit and kneel on the floor all the time and get pressure sores when he's in certain episodes and stuff like that. So yeah, tell a story. Got a few coming in to here. How can a monitoring officer be challenged for wanting to take more than, I've got 6 weeks to reply to breaches of the Care Act? All challenges, so there's two ways to challenge anything that's happening. One is through the complaints process, which is, usually a local authority, you'll complain about it, you'll get a response. You can say, I'm not happy with that response, and ask to go to the next stage, often called a stage 2 level complaint. And then a more senior manager should be answering it. And at that point, they'll often put at the bottom of the letter, if you're still not happy, you can go to the ombudsman, local authority ombudsman. And, and that can take several months. It really varies. Sometimes people get a reply after a month or two. Sometimes it can be 6-9 months that the ombudsman's investigators are so busy, and they will be looking to see, also prioritised by what the impact has been on that, if it's an ongoing problem or if there's if there's been a financial impact, if you've been having to pay for something that local authority should have had to be paid, for example, they can ask for the refund. The more immediate challenge is what's called a judicial review. And the issue with judicial review is twofold. One, it has to be quite a serious breach, because they don't allow all judicial reviews to go forward. And two, you really do need to find a community care solicitor who can take that on. And part of what Access Social Care is doing is trying to really develop a career pathway for community care solicitors, because there aren't enough, and there's not, and they aren't paid enough. They can do a case for 2 years and they don't get paid till the end of it, that sort of thing. It's really rubbish. So but it is worth looking on the Law Society website for community care solicitors, phoning the solicitor and saying, I emailed the monitoring officer, they're still not replying, is there something you can do? Be very concise about the issue and what you want the solicitor to do, and you've got more chance of them picking it up. Andy,
I was going to say, yeah, on that point of complaint. So I had to put a complaint in about a year ago about a different issue to DRE, and I was really hesitant to do it because it feels like, you're not, you're damaging the relationship between the local authority, which can feel intimidating. It feels, there's a power difference and power imbalance. And it feels kind of just an intimidating process. But I did it with help from Access Social Care and also the Access Ava bot. That helped me produce a letter, which I gave to my local authority, and actually it resolved the situation I had quite in a straightforward manner. So I would say if you do have to put complaints in, try not to be put off from doing it, because actually it resolved what I needed to do. And if I hadn't have done the contact with Access Social Care, I might have just ended up in a much worse situation, like kicking it down the line kind of thing and then not getting it resolved. So I'd say complaints are definitely a useful tool.
Jade, you asked, you were told to wait for a review to submit DRE. Can they insist on that?
Yes. Yeah, I also just wanted to add a bit about my experience, because I've had quite a difficult time with my DRE, and I guess I just wanted to show it from the other side as well, that it's not always simple. Not that you're saying it's simple, but I just mean the way councils can make it very difficult. So I asked to put my DRE claim in around April when I got a financial assessment. I was told I had to wait until my next review, which I did, so I had to wait until the July. I submitted 19 different DRE claims with explanations, with evidence from my doctor. They took another year to respond to that. So to be fair, I should have put in complaints sooner, but I just kind of waited. They came back fairly recently, actually, about a month ago. Having redone my financial assessment, they ignored all 19 DREs that I'd submitted completely, didn't give a reason for rejecting them either, just ignored it. And they reduced the 2 DREs I already had in place, one for gardening, one for clothing and bedding. They reduced it to £1 a month, which, to be honest, I felt was a bit of a slap in the face. To be honest, it felt, I don't know, what can you buy for £1 a month? You can't even buy a sock, So I have put in a complaint so far, aimed at the fact they haven't given any reason why they've rejected all 19 and reduced the 2 that they have. I'm going to wait to see what they say to that, and then I guess take it further, complain about the reasons. But yeah, I just wondered if the original bit was lawful, that they could ask to wait for a review, or can you just submit it any time? Are they just making things difficult, or is it for each council to set policies on that?
We can have a look into this as well, but I thought somewhere in the guidance it says that you can request a review of your financial assessment whenever needed. They might ask, if you're trying to change it every week, that it's done in a more orderly way or something. But we can try and find whether that's detailed somewhere. But Lisa's just I don't know, that's about another one. But yeah, I mean, they can put in other processes. So in Gloucestershire, they've just put in a process of a panel, but it's so DRE will go to get discussed by a group of not just the finance team, but also a couple of social workers from other teams, so that they are considering some of the, they've got more knowledge about specific disabilities and what might be a reasonable cost sort of thing. So they are, whilst it looks like an extra step which takes longer, they are actually accepting more DRE as a result of having that panel actually. So but always in the Care Act and guidance and things, it's saying it should be in a reasonable time. And the Ombudsman and complaints will always consider what the impact of you is of things taking longer than say 6 to 8 weeks or something. And that can be sometimes that you are then not aware of how much you need to pay, and you can't reasonably expected to have guessed how much, and so you can't pay the backdated payment or something. But it is, it is really easy to let things drift on the complaints process, and I learned the hard way as well, is that after you've complained, they send you back a long list of things, reply to that complaint, that you start arguing about what they've said, not about just saying you haven't answered my question, I want to go to the next level of complaint sort of thing, or you haven't answered it to my satisfaction. So just if you complain and they reply and you're not happy, just escalate it quickly with, I don't think you've answered my question properly. Please can you go to stage 2? Otherwise I will be forced to go to the Ombudsman type thing. And again, Access Ava has got quite a few letters which help you with those sorts of wording.
Lovely, thank you.
I was going to say, when I put my DRE in, it was, I don't know, 4 months after my assessment. It wasn't linked to an assessment or a financial review. It was just, I think they probably instigated them to do one. But I didn't have to provide any more kind of information about benefits and all that kind of stuff and savings. I just put in my DRE mid-year, and then they looked through it. So they should be able to do that.
Yeah. The other thing is, and I only add this because other people will have the similar thing, is they've waited so long. I'm now being transferred across to Universal Credit this month. So so now I'm going to have to go through it all again because all my finances are going to change, which I think a lot of people are going to have that issue. So it's just so frustrating. But yeah. So thank you very much.
And they're very quick when the benefits go up each year to change your assessment up. They tend to be, on my experience, very much slower to take them back down again if something else changes. So yeah, just it is about writing and saying I need you to review this because it is having an impact on me, and I expect to reply in the next 10 days, or keep that sort of pressure up. And as they don't get caught into a rabbit hole, arguing with something else they've introduced in their response. The monitoring officer, somebody's asked in the chat that, so each local authority has somebody who's responsible for whether the local authority is acting lawfully, and they're called the monitoring officer. And they're quite handy sometimes, in that if, for example, like you're told you can't have a care assessment or review for the next 10 months because there's a long list of people who are a higher priority than you. It's really hard to argue with that manager, because they have got, they may have many, many more people in the queue that are a higher priority than you. But that's not your problem. They still have a legal duty to assess your needs in a reasonable time. And that's where sometimes going up to the monitoring officer to say, I've been told I have to wait for 10 months for this assessment. I don't believe that's lawful. Very simply, can sometimes unlock that. And again, you may be able to find it on your local authority website, or send it into an email into inquiries at the local authority, but for the attention of the monitoring officer. You don't need to know their name. And then that should get to somewhere as well. So again, sometimes, especially if you're then complaining about the complaints process or something like that, that you've already tried to take it through a complaints process and it's not going anywhere.
was just a really quick point there that Annie put in, because I understand the kind of fear around reviews and things like that as well, and I know it's not as straightforward quite as saying, but they aren't really meant to cut any packages on a review. That's meant to be that's just as a point there. I don't know if Jackie or Elise wanted to expand on that.
Yeah, the Care Act's very clear that a review is looking at, is the care plan meeting the needs that were identified in the assessment? Is it going okay? Do you want to change a Friday for Thursday? Do you want to tweak it by an hour here or there? If there's any significant change in needs, they should be doing an assessment following that review. So it should be, we believe there's been significant change in your needs, either higher or lower. Therefore, we're going to do a new assessment. And then it should be looking at all of those 10 areas of the assessment and giving you the support through that process again. So you should, and you've got the same rights of appeal and all that sort of thing. Yeah, they shouldn't go into a review and come out with significant changes to any package. And they shouldn't, and it certainly shouldn't be triggered by a financial assessment review. And I do get that it is a lot of energy. I think with all of these things, you can only do what you can do. So if there's just one or two disability related expenses that you can focus on the first time, and then next time they're reviewing it, think, oh, what else is there, and add it in, and give it a try. Sometimes they'll accept things that you weren't expecting them to accept without a fight. So take that as a win and move on, or drop it for that year. It's never going to be perfect, but it's about keeping up the pressure. I mean, essentially they can waive charges. I was just saying something on the chat, if you are really saying, I cannot afford this and I'm not going to be able to accept the package of support for my child, and it's not sustainable for me to carry on doing it, have a really honest conversation with the social worker and explain why it's not affordable. If you've got huge amounts of credit card debt or something like that and are really struggling to pay that back, and then it's causing you huge stress, I mean, they can waive the fees. They've still got some duties to you. It isn't common, but it is in those exceptional circumstances. So do speak to them before just not going forward with support. I mean, Sam, I don't know if it's Samco or Sam, but they in my experience, a couple of people I've known have just not paid towards their care, and it's racked up debt, and the local authority threatens to take it to debt recovery. They've got all local authorities will have a debt recovery list, and some people are on the debt recovery list for years and years. The lovely Iggy Patel, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, he used to argue that people should just, if they can, ride it out, because if the local authority takes you to the small claims court doesn't bother about minimum income guarantee, all those sorts of things. It looks about what's affordable for you to pay to repay debt, and that might be £1 a week. So, they can't take money that you haven't got. If you need that care, keep having that care. But I know how stressful debt is and threat debts, but they shouldn't be letting you they have to keep providing the care, really.
Right, that was the last question, so I don't know if we want to wrap up now, and if there are any other questions people want to send to me, I can pass on to you. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think we did quite well, Kat, answering as we went along, didn't we?
Yeah.
Between the three of us. So,
Yeah.
when the local authority calculate the care cost, can they just reduce the direct payments? This is a really interesting one. So this is where, with a direct payment account, some local authorities will pay the amount into the account net of your contribution rather than pay it all in and bill you for your contribution. And again, Lisa, I don't know if you can short a reminder to try and get, because I think there's been some cases around that. I was trying to follow up with Mitch about it because for somebody I was doing, but you know, again, they should, I believe, be putting it in gross and billing you for your contribution separately. But we'll try and figure out if that's been challenged successfully or not.
Okay, also, I just want to say thank you to the three of you. You've been absolutely fantastic. This is such a lot to, people don't realise answering on the fly is not an easy thing to do. And you've given so much brilliant information. So I just want to say thank you so much, and for the brilliant presentation as well that covered so much. That presentation was emailed out to everyone last night, just so you have it. But if you didn't get a copy of it, just let me know and I'll send it out to you again. But yeah, so thank you so much for everyone for coming and giving up your time. I know it's been a long afternoon, but I think it's really needed by the amount of people that signed up, and yeah, it just shows how many people out there struggling, which is unfortunate. But hopefully we can all contact our councils and put the DRE claims in. Don't put it off. I put it off for 2 years, so I know exactly what it's like to bury your head in the sand, and I'll do that next year when I've got energy. So yeah. But yeah, thank you ever.
Look at Access Ava on our website. It's got lots of little videos and easy read documents and template letters. And it, you know, any feedbacks about it is also helpful about other things you might want on it.
Thank you. And what we'll do is this recording will go up on our website at some point. Access Ava will be linked there. The chat will be on there so you can see the answers to what was given. So it will all be in one place for everyone to find. So just check the website under the event or previous events section. So yeah, you'll be able to find the link to Karen, just send me an email with your question and we'll pass it on. So don't worry. But yeah, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Jade, for organising it as well.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
someone needs to thank you.